Well, the calls for Mayor Adams to resign are growing even louder from within his own party. The bombshell federal indictment against the mayor comes amid multiple federal investigations targeting City Hall and government officials, including some of his closest political allies and most trusted aides.
The mayor has denied any wrongdoing. He says he will continue his duties, but many are asking, can he effectively lead the city with everything that's going on? Joining us right now with a little perspective on this, political analyst Hank Sheinkopf. You've been through it all, Hank.
I have seen a lot of things, yes.
Let's talk about this, because we don't even know where these investigations are going. We've seen the mayor indicted on a bunch of charges, but we know that police officials have had their phones confiscated. We know some of the mayor's inner circle have had their phones confiscated. What do you think?
Well, we've seen a lot of leaks about a lot of different things. It's going to grow. The feds don't put this kind of time or money or resources into something that's not going to continue. Question becomes whether he is guilty or not is not the issue. Can the government function? And the governor is going to have to make a decision at some point about how she deals with it. The best way is probably to form an independent commission of well-regarded New Yorkers to help her make a decision, so it doesn't look like she's knocking the guy out of the box.
But she's got to worry about her own hide. I mean, she just got knocked around by Nancy Pelosi just a few weeks ago for what happened the last election in New York.
No question about it. And she's running for re-election in 2026. So this becomes much more complicated. If the Democrats do not pick up seats in New York, in these areas surrounding New York City, as a function of worry in the suburbs that corruption will seep over the city line, for example, or migrants or the rest of the things that are upsetting them, it will be more complicated for the governor.
You know, Mayor Adams says he's not going to resign. Is there a tipping point that you see where his hand may be forced? Adams
is not the kind of guy that resigns. The only way he goes is if he's forced out, or his lawyers say to him, look, we have a real case. If you don't leave, it's going to get terrible, even worse. But he's not the kind of guy who resigns. The more pragmatic issue is people who say they can win and are now standing up, because if they get in the line of fire and the public feels they're leaning on Adams too much, they're going to pay a price for it.
And when we talk about what may happen next, a lot of this pressure is now on Governor Hochul. About what she may or may not do. Is there a time frame that you see here where she may have to make a decision?
It depends on how many indictments and how chaotic it gets and whether the city can conduct its business, which is difficult. Again, I think that the smart move for her is to have an independent committee of well-regarded New Yorkers who will help her make that decision with recommendations.
So, in other words, an independent committee that kind of buys her time so she doesn't have to make a decision. They make a recommendation. I mean, that could stretch out months, theoretically.
It could stretch out months, hopefully to get through next June. Having a nonpartisan election, which would happen if Adams resigns or is forced to leave, a nonpartisan election with no parties, and ranked choice voting could mean that anybody could win.
So let's talk about the mayor and how he conducts business, because during his arraignment last week, the judge said, you got to be very careful how you talk to your staff. I mean, some of them are under investigation as well. How does he conduct business when he's got to be careful with what he asks Ingrid Lewis-Martin, who had her phones taken away from her and her home raided on Friday?
You know, it's hard to have a lawyer with you 24 hours a day, which is what he's going to living like. I mean, he can't do anything without legal guidance, because anything he says might in fact be on a wiretap. We don't know.
So let's talk about his attorney, by the way. He's a very well-respected guy, Mr. Spiro, Alex Spiro. He doesn't lose a case.
He's very well-respected. It was a very smart move to get him. And that tells you the serious nature of that Adams understands the seriousness of what he's facing.
And, you know, when we talk about everything we're talking about here is legal, what's going to happen next, where he's going to reside. In the meantime, the mayor is going to churches this weekend, and he is sort of trying to rally his base, in a sense. Is that basically all he can do at this point?
You're right, but I would extend it beyond that. This is not just about rallying his base. New York City, no matter which ethnic groups are living here at any time, is a melange of different groups with different feelings, but religion tends to define much of what they do. And these are communal activities, not just in the black community, but in all communities. So therefore, if you want to stay in power, go to your base. And religious base in this town is what helped elect him. Why? They wanted a guy who was a policeman to calm things down. And in the Jewish community, they wanted someone who would stand up for Israel. So this idea that someone else can walk in and win the Jewish vote is particularly nutty as far as I'm concerned.
I mean, we saw a headline this week. Looming over all this is Governor Cuomo, maybe. Whether or not he wants this job, whether or not he's going to move in. I mean, what are you hearing about that?
Would he be a great candidate? Yeah, probably. Is it going to happen tomorrow? No. And by the way, standing up and saying you're going to win particular votes by the people who are with him, not the brightest thing, because those people are going to say, what are you kidding? The reality is, in a primary election or any other election, the Jewish vote in New York City is predominantly on the west side of Manhattan. They're not voting for Andrew Cuomo. And on the east side of Manhattan, they're not voting for Andrew Cuomo, those women. They're going to vote for somebody else. And Jerry Nadler, the congressman from the west side who is potently still got the juice, will tell his people to turn out for Scott Stringer. Not so simple.
Wow, okay. Hank Sheinkopf, a lot going on in New York City. Thank you so much for coming on and giving us your perspective this morning.
Thank you, Hank. We appreciate it.